I'm going to talk to you about here is actually that stuff over there and right here, which is the shade cloth experiments. I've been doing shade cloth experiments for a couple of years. We started out looking at shade cloth in peppers and tomatoes and also some lettuce trials. And we sort of gave up on the tomatoes because we didn't see like a real great impact, although Jerry Brust over at University of Maryland has had really good success using shade cloth and tomatoes. But for peppers, uh, we've seen like 30% increase in marketable yield for peppers with 30% black shade cloth on, and uh, major reductions in the percent of the peppers that are unmarketable because of sun scald or small size, and also um, increases in pepper size under shade cloth. So I had 2 years where I looked at different colors of shade cloth. So I had red, blue, silver, black, and white, and comparing that to no shade. In those trials with peppers, the 30% black shade cloth had significantly higher marketable yield than all of the other treatments. So than all of the other shade treatments, and definitely like much higher yield than the the unshaded treatment. So there were 2 years of trials like that with a different colored shade. Then for those trials, we put the shade on soon after planting, and then we didn't take it off until the middle of August. So that gets to be a pain because you don't have to take it off to spray, but you do have to take it off if you want to pick the peppers. Um, so we wanted to look at the timing of shade cloth. So for 2 years, I've been looking at what happens when you put the shade cloth on only in June versus only in July, shade cloth in June and July, and then the treatment that we used in the initial study, which was from planting to the middle of August. The past 2 years, I've been using colored peppers. This is a management practice that requires some investment of time and money. So maybe if somebody was growing colored peppers, they'd be more interested in doing that. Last year, we planted the trial on June 1st, and on June 2nd, it was 90 degrees. I don't know if you all remember that day, but it was pretty wretched. That was not what we were hoping we would get at the beginning of June, but like that was forecast. So we planted the peppers, put the stakes on, and put the shade on all in the same day. And there were massive differences in plant survival. If you have tried to plant peppers in black plastic when the weather is hot, you will have experienced the problems that we get when there's hot air moving out from underneath the plastic and crashing into the plant stem, and the plant doesn't have a big enough root system to transpire enough to cool itself off, and then it just fries the stem right in a little spot and girdles the plant and dies. So last year we saw like big effects on plant survival, uh, differences between the ones that had shade on in June versus no shade in June. So our July only treatment, we had lower plant survival. However, there were some plants that kind of limped along, and then when we put the shade on in July, they recovered, whereas in the unshaded treatment where they continued to be stressed for all of July, we had even more plant loss. So shade early in the season, especially when we have 90 degrees in June, right after you transplant, was really beneficial. There were obvious yield impacts from that, like stand protection from the shade. But we also saw larger peppers and fewer unmarketable fruits because of the quality defects that I mentioned in last year's trial. This year, if you remember the beginning of June, it was not 90 degrees. It's kind of cool, and then it kept getting smoky. Um, and so we have temperature loggers in here. I haven't had a chance to analyze the data. I'm going to be really curious to see sort of how last year's shade effects compared to this year's, since we were getting like Canadian burnt up tree shade plus this shade. And yeah, we just like did the first harvest off of here, and we haven't really weighed it. I wouldn't say that I'm seeing massive differences in treatments at this point, um, but that's partly because the treatments that have marketable peppers on them, those peppers haven't ripened yet. They still have, you know, because they're nice and big. Then the other thing that I have out here this year under shade is a lot of lettuce. So there's two different lettuce experiments going on. One is a variety trial of white plastic with shade. So the shade treatment isn't different. The idea is that I'm trying to provide, you know, the best possible environment that you can have to grow lettuce in the summer, which we don't normally do. And all the varieties in that trial, in your handout, there's a list of them. All of those varieties are varieties that are allegedly heat tolerant. So that means that they should be resistant to bolting and they shouldn't tend to develop bitter flavor under high temperature conditions. So I think there are 14 varieties in the trial, and you'll see in the handout there are 6 of them that passed the test for the first trial, which was planted, it says in your handout, let's see, June 5th, and we harvested it in the middle of July. So there were a couple of varieties that produced really like good tasting lettuce under this management system that we harvested in the middle of July. And what's out there now is the second planting date. We harvested half of each rep last week, and hopefully maybe tomorrow I'll be harvesting the other ones. You can see that there's a bunch of them that are bolting, so those we can just ignore. And then the ones that aren't bolting, I'll have to taste them and see if they're edible or not. The other thing that is out here is a trial looking at different colored plastic. So that's further back, and combining that with shade cloth. So there's bare ground black plastic, which don't ever plant lettuce on black plastic. That's just for experimental purposes. This is not a recommended practice. Okay, white plastic and aluminized, so silver plastic mulch with and without shade. Looking at varieties that are heat tolerant under that management system. Both of these, that trial's being repeated in with collaborators at UMass, so more New England production area. And the goal there is just to try and see like what can we do to create the most conducive environment during high temperature conditions for lettuce production. Then there's some other stuff out here that I guess if you want to hear about it, you can come next Thursday. Any questions about the shade cloth? Oh, and I did bring this stuff out here for reason. Okay, so on the lettuce, using these wires to make the hoops. They're flexible. They come straight. They bend to make. All of the shade cloth out there is 30%. That's generally what we recommend for vegetable production. And I use these aluminum tent stakes to pin it down to the ground. They're very reusable. And when I run out, then I use landscape staples, but I don't really recommend them because they're not reusable. But they were laying around. Any questions about the shade cloth?